this special edition of the Lacy Johnson podcast, this Juneteenth edition of the Lacy Johnson podcast. And this evening, we're going to have as our guest the national head of the Frederick Douglass Foundation. And we're going to get into a little bit about the background with the Civil War, the whole situation where the slaves down in Texas did not know about the Emancipation Proclamation until it was told them in 1865, June 19th, 1865, even though the preliminary Emancipation Proclamation was in 1862 and the final one was in 1863. And so we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about Frederick Douglass' relationship with President Lincoln and how he was the conscience of our nation during the Civil War. And may even get into the Civil War a little bit, because a lot of times we don't know our history. And we'll talk a little bit about the history of the Republican Party, the history of the Democratic Party. And, you know, let me just say this. I got into a discussion, a dialogue, some might call it debate, but it really wasn't. But with one of my friends about the whole 3/5 compromise that occurred during the Constitution Convention. And it all started because they were very, very upset with the counting slaves as 3/5 human. And what I try to explain to them, and what a lot of people don't know, is that counting the slaves as 3/5 human, let me put it this way, not counting them as human at all would have actually hurt the slaveholder worse than counting them as human. It's politics and understanding the details, because a lot of times the devil is in the detail. Everyone knows we have the census every 10 years. And one of the main purposes of the census is to decide how you apportion representation in the House. Long story short, if you would have counted the slaves, that would have actually, as a whole human being, that would have actually helped the slaveholders in the southern states with the slaves, because they would have had more representative in Congress. So, and I hope you're following this, in a really strange kind of way, counting the slaves as a human person, a whole human, would have actually hurt the slaves more so than it helped. That's all I'm going to say. Do some research on the 3/5 compromise, and let's go from there. So that's why I'm happy to have someone on today as Bishop Dean Nelson, so we can get into some of those facts and figures and educate you on them. And so once again, I'll be right back. We're going to talk about Juneteenth. We're going to talk about Frederick Douglass. We're going to talk about the Frederick Douglass Foundation with our guest tonight, Bishop Dean Nelson. In the meantime, go out to the website, go out to YouTube or whatever, and click the bell for notification, subscribe to the channel, like the podcast, and shop on the online store so we can get things going and get more information out to you. I'm open. I love to be proven wrong, because that's when I learn things. So anybody got different ideas, different opinions, we'd like to hear from you. And hey, look, if you got the same ideas and same opinion, we'd like to hear from you anyway. So stay tuned. I'll be right back with Bishop Dean Nelson as part of our special Juneteenth edition of the Lacy Johnson podcast. Our Juneteenth show, podcast as I would call it, we have as our guest today Bishop Dean Nelson. Bishop Nelson is the chairman of the National Frederick Douglass Foundation, and we're going to talk about that a little, because Frederick Douglass, of course, played a key role in the Civil War, in the whole Juneteenth, and we probably discover some details here that we haven't talked about before. I got into a discussion with some of my fellow Black sisters and brothers about, they're Democrats and liberals, of course, about our history and the 3/5 compromise and long story short, they had an exact opposite perspective of the 3/5 compromise than what it was in reality. And part of the issue with us is just to educate ourselves, and that's one of the roles that the Frederick Douglass Foundation is gonna be playing across the country. And in the spirit of open and honest communication, I will be working with some local people here to start up a local chapter of the Frederick Douglass Foundation for the state of Minnesota. So, having said that, without further ado, let's welcome Bishop Dean Nelson. Welcome, Bishop. Welcome to the Lacy Johnson podcast.
Man, thank you so much. It's great to be with you again. I enjoyed our last visit and, couldn't figure out why it took you so long to bring me back.
I'm insensitive, man, Bishop Nelson. No, and by the way, while we're thinking about it, go out to my YouTube channel, click the bell to get notification, click the like button, subscribe to the channel, and we got an online store out there with some nice Lacy Johnson paraphernalia. So go out and support the podcast. And of course, we accept donations and things too to support the podcast. So sorry about that, Dean. Had to get that out of the way. So here's the thing, Dean. I do recall, I think from our last interview, I think you were born in the Maryland, state of Maryland, or you're currently living there. Give us a little background on your give us a little bio background, and then we'll delve into some of the Juneteenth related issues and some of the things that you're doing with the Frederick Douglass Foundation. But just give us a summary about where you're from, your family, where you grew up at, and just your educational background, Dean, if you don't mind.
Yeah, so I do live currently in the state of Maryland, and proud to be here because this was the home state of the great abolitionist Frederick Douglass. And so, but I actually grew up on the other side of the Potomac in the Commonwealth of Virginia. That's where I grew up in a relatively small town called Marshall, Virginia. That's about 60 miles west of Washington, D.C., kind of at the foothills of the Blue Ridge. So kind of like you, Lacy, you could call me a country boy. I grew up with my grandfather's farm. He had 70 acres, and he gave my mom and my dad a little piece of property on that 70 acres. They built a home, raised, myself, and I've got 3 sisters and actually a half brother that's become a really important part of my family. And so my dad still lives there. We affectionately refer to it as Nelson Mountain. My dad still lives there. He'll be 85 this year, and just a tight knit family. Grew up in a small little country Baptist church where the values of hard work and honesty were instilled in us. My parents grew up in segregated schools, in Virginia, and even in my little town in the 1980s, there was a small restaurant that didn't allow Black people to eat there. So I'm acquainted with racism and discrimination. But at the same time, my parents instilled in us a sense of respect and a sense of self-respect. And so just because somebody might look at me and call me the N-word or something like that, I looked at them back and said, there's something wrong with them, not something wrong with me. And I'm just proud of the heritage that we have, and excited to raise my kids in the same way and empower them to be great citizens in our country, and also Christians to honor God.
Well, yeah, we do have a lot in common. Similar here. I remember the first time that I heard the N-word come out of a white person's mouth was actually, even though I grew up down south, was right here in Minneapolis, Minnesota.
Wow, look at that.
Yeah, and in fact, I tell people I'm from the South. I grew up there. Been going back and forth there for 60-something years. And believe it or not, I still have not heard the N-word come out of a white person's mouth. Maybe God has protected me or whatever. But I think, and if you're like me, being born and raised as a Christian, we deal with hatred, racism, and things in a whole separate manner. I was telling someone the other day, they had me at a forum, is that our parents and elders really simplified the world for me. There was God, there was the world, and there was me. And God in the world was a constant, and it all depended upon me and how my perspective in life, how hard I worked, the way I looked at things, my attitude, my reaction, my tenacity, and my spirituality. So I know exactly where you're coming from now. Of course, people who does not have that spiritual foundation, they don't understand why you don't strike out to people when they are racist or whatever. Why don't? How does your Christianity, or how did your Christianity help you respond to racism and being called the N word a little different, Bishop Nelson?
Yeah, man, I gave my life to the Lord as a young man, but I had an encounter. Simply, I just had an encounter with God. I recognized that while I was a man, I also recognized that I was a sinner, and that apart from God, there was nothing really good about me. And I remember in that little Baptist church. Something happened, and I remember my cousins looking at me and say, "What happened to you? What happened to you?" But it was just it was an encounter with God, and ever since that day, my desire has been to honor God. I haven't done it perfectly. I've had a whole lot to learn, but since that time, I've tried to live my life with the example of Jesus in mind. And then there have been other examples, like the man over my shoulder, Frederick Douglass, who went through what much worse than I ever went through. I mean, beaten, had to escape, from slavery, went through all that he went through, but yet still found it in his heart to forgive the person who said that he owned him. Douglas was a true minister of the gospel, as well as an abolitionist. And so we've had a lot of good examples within our community, from Douglas to Martin Luther King Jr. or other people, not perfect men, but people that pursued the biblical idea of all men created equal.
Yeah, and if you're like me, that's a very good response. If you're like me, I'm a big fan of the Civil War documentary. And what I like about that is that you learn a lot about Frederick Douglass and his relationship with President Lincoln, how he felt about slavery and how the war was being fought. And so, if we're going to have a Juneteenth podcast, I can't think of anything better than to talk about Frederick Douglass, talk about Juneteenth, and have you, Bishop Nelson, on to lead us through that. Now, one thing a lot of people may not know is that President Lincoln and Frederick Douglass had an agreement that he would actually, according to my reading, go across the country and let former slaves know about the Emancipation Proclamation. It didn't quite get executed. And where I'm getting to there is that if that would have happened, we might not have even had a Juneteenth, because you might have let them know down in Florida that the Emancipation Proclamation had been signed in 1963, at least the final one. I think the original one, that was a preliminary one that was in 1962. But
18,
so
yeah,
I can't think of anyone better to discuss that. Now, tell us about when you first heard about Frederick Douglass, and you mentioned some of the things and why you're such an admirer of hers, of him, and fill that in for us, Bishop Nelson.
Yeah. So I have in my possession something that is referred to as a Golden Legacy comic books. And these were Black History comic books that when I was a little boy, my mother brought home. And in this Golden Legacy comic books, there was one figure who had two comic books written about him, and that was Frederick Douglass. So that was my early introduction to Mr. Douglass. I would later learn a whole lot more about him from, again, the encounter that he had as a young boy with Jesus Christ during, kind of a revival movement that took place during America. Then I would learn a little bit more about, his devotion to God as a minister, but also learn more about how he conducted himself even with his family. He raised his kids with his wife, and his wife did most of it because he was on the road traveling a lot. But Anna Murray Douglass raised her kids memorizing scripture. They had to quote scripture before they had dinner at the dinner table often. So those were some of the early things that I learned about Frederick Douglass, and it's been a joy, man. There's so much more to learn. You talked a little bit about his relationship with President Lincoln, which was not positive early on. I mean, Douglass really chided Lincoln and
Yep.
challenged Lincoln,
Yep.
but Douglass was also smart. I mean, he said, "Hey, look, we want to ultimately have full citizenship for Black people in this country." And one of the things that he did, if you remember that great movie Glory, he actually was responsible for helping the 54th Massachusetts Regiment to get underway. And he felt that if we could have Black men that would fight against the South for the freedom of our nation, then it would be hard for Lincoln or anybody to deny them full citizenship. So Douglass and Lincoln had a good relationship. At the end of Lincoln's life, of course, when he was assassinated, Douglass would have some of the strongest, most powerful, affirming words of President Lincoln, because he saw he was a man who actually changed his position and did what he said, particularly with regard to the Emancipation Proclamation.
And you are right. They did have some tension between them. I think Douglas thought that Lincoln was dragging his feet on the emancipation of the slave. Someone came up with this idea that we're going to allow Black Americans to colonize somewhere else, that Lincoln supported. So Douglas was on him about all of that, and he
That's
served
very
as his
true.
conscience in a lot of ways. And I found out that the first time Douglas visited the White House, he visited uninvited and just went in and talked to Lincoln and let him know his feelings about those two issues. So Dean, uh, Bishop Nelson, when we look at history, and I'm a big fan of history, I mean, the Democrat Party was behind slavery. Those are Democrats, slave owners. The lynchers, people were lynching Black people, were Democrats. Those who came up with the Jim Crow laws was Democrats. Those who supported segregation was Democrats. The founders of the KKK were Democrats. How do you explain the fact that the Black community is so supportive and I'm going to say this, kind of in love with the Democrat Party today, given their history as it relates to Black people and slavery?
Yeah, man. One of the things that we try to do is to highlight the history, of our country, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And your question is a great one. I think when I speak to most Black Americans, number one, they don't know that, or they say, "Hey, look, that was way back then." And some of them are almost convinced that the Democrats from then have switched and become Republicans. And that's also not true. You have a very few group of Dixiecrats and segregationists who switched political parties. And so some of them try to blow that out of proportion, but that's not true. Um, we really need to do a better job of telling our story. But I think also we need to do a better job of talking about what the Republican Party, and if a person wants to be independent, but what it stands for. What really made the biggest difference for me is when someone showed me the platform of both parties. And I
Right.
read the platform. And if I read the platforms over the years, because to your point, at the very beginning, when the Republican Party was established, part of its planks in its platform were, number one, to end slavery. Secondly, was to provide citizenship for Black Americans or former slaves. And interestingly enough, another one was to make marriage between one man and one woman throughout the entire country, because at that time in the West, polygamy was growing, particularly through the Mormon, religion. And they wanted to say, "Hey, we believe that it's one man and one woman." So it's very interesting from the history of the Republican Party in terms of where it stood. But I think that, today there's a lot that has happened in between that time. Republicans have not done a very good job, in my opinion, of engagement in representing the values that they have. To be perfectly honest, sometimes I almost think that they want to keep things the way that they are. But you and I know differently. We believe in the values of the Republican Party simply because there's nothing in it that is contrary to God's word. Now, it's different how people vote. It's different when I talk about elected officials. It's different in terms of policy positions that individuals may take. But from a platform standpoint, that party has nothing in it that is offensive. And if I go with the Democrat Party, there's so many things that are in it that are contrary to God's word and God's standard. I just could no longer agree with that. Now, do I vote for Democrats? I find some that are willing to challenge their party. I work very closely with Democrats for Life. The president of Democrats for Life is a close friend, someone that I've mentored over the years. So there are exceptions to the rule, but the bottom line is that foundations matter. Was that scripture in Psalms that said, if the foundations be destroyed, what can the righteous do? So foundations matter. And I think that for me, that's the biggest thing. And my hope is that we'll be able to help more Black Americans and all Americans, particularly those of faith, to understand that these things are important and you don't leave them when you go into the voting booth.
That's very good. You touched on a few things here. You touched on reading the platform and what I tell people is that it's been my experience with politics that none of them quite do what they say they're going to do, and there's, for lack of a better word, some hypocrisy in all of it. But when I compare platforms, I'm like you. The Republican platform stands, to me, is more consistent with biblical teachings, the teachings of my parents, the Constitution, and everything that helps me set my principles. I think the Republican platform is more consistent with it. Now, which I just want to touch on a particular issue that was in the news over the last year or so, or since the last time we talked, and which I think had a great impact on the last election. The whole issue of abortion. And coming to you as a layman, Bishop Nelson, I'll put it to you like this. I do not understand how any Christian can support a party that's for abortion. And I can't find anything in the Bible that says that, well, everything I know of Jesus, he's been drastically opposed to that. Yet, I talk to a lot of, especially Black ministers, who find some type of way, they use some type of spiritual or mental acrobats to actually justify support of the party that's favored of abortion. How do you explain that support for abortion by our Black spiritual leaders? And is there any interpretation of scripture that give them some wiggle room? And I know that's a compound question, but you understand what I'm getting at, Bishop Nelson.
Sure. You know, I think the important thing to remember, and there was an article that one of our staff wrote just a month ago that highlighted the lack of a biblical worldview amongst all Christians, not just, Black folks who go to church, but, Blacks. And if we were to look, I mean, we are more likely to go to church than whites. We're more likely to be in a Bible study. We're more likely to read the Bible than whites or any other group. So I do think that it's important for you to highlight that we don't have a developed worldview, and what I mean by that is we basically have said, "Hey, we'll talk about salvation, about getting to heaven, but we don't want to talk that much anymore about morality." And then if you dig a little bit deeper, how we should conduct ourselves according to the Word of God in terms of whether it's economics or whether it's the sanctity of life issue, we jump to a political position. I have had conversations with major ministry leaders, and when I really pin them down, they're wrong. They know they're wrong. They know that they're compromising. But I will say this: I am blessed that when we have had many conversations, there are a lot of guys that are, high status, leaders. And sometimes you have to have those meetings behind closed doors.
Right.
And I've seen them repent. I've seen them said, man, look, this is just how I saw it. I really didn't really think about the word of God, because we have an initiative at the Douglas Leadership Institute called the Jeremiah 1 and 5 project that emphasizes that scripture where God says very clearly that, before, you were born, I knew you. So
Yep.
God
Yep.
doesn't even deal with the sanctity of life issue from the standpoint of conception. He's like, nope, even
Yep.
before conception,
Yep.
I knew you. So from a theological standpoint, there should be really no debate at all. But I will state this also, because it's important to note, it's not just a theological or a biblical argument. It's a scientific argument.
Yes.
98% of biologists agree that life begins at conception. So it's important for us as ministry leaders, people who want to encourage others to have a biblical worldview on these issues. God has always, always stood on the side of protecting innocent life and has a lot to say about the shedding of innocent blood. So I really am excited about what we've done through that Jeremiah 1 and 5 project. Over 1,000 pastors and ministry leaders that have signed. And as I will say, many pastors and Black leaders that I have met with, we've seen a number of them change their position. And I'll close with this. One of the reasons that we've gotten them to change their position isn't just a theological argument. It is a racial argument. When I tell them that in 1939, Margaret Sanger wrote a letter to Clarence Gamble saying, we don't want word to go out that we want to exterminate the Negro population, their eyes kind of open up. They lean in a little bit more and they'll say, tell me more, preacher. And we tell them about the history of the eugenics movement within our country and how it was used to slow down the birth rate of Black people because they didn't want to have too many of us.
Right. Well, here's the thing, and once again, and eventually, a common theme when I talk to my friends and people I know is just a lack of knowledge of what's, because a lot of us don't know the history of Planned Parenthood and Margaret Sanger, and in fact, a lot of us don't even know have any idea, and I've heard anywhere from 20 to 60 million Black babies being aborted. And once again, I appreciate it. In fact, I want to get some information from you. I will on the Jeremiah 1 and 5 project, because that's one of my arguments when I talk to people. To me, I'm like you. There's no question of when life begins. And if we don't decide it begins at conception, who's going to decide whether it's 6 week, 15? But I'm not going to get too deep in that for now. Uh, we've talked about you being the I'm assuming national director of the Frederick Douglass National Foundation. Give us a history behind the founding of that organization and some of the main goals that you have in mind as far as leadership of the Frederick Douglass Foundation from a national standpoint, Bishop Nelson.
Yeah, man, and I'll try to be succinct, but basically, after the election of President Obama, I had a meeting in Washington, D.C. with about 25 Black, what I would say center-right leaders. Some of them were independent, some of them were Republican, some of them had leadership positions within the Republican Party, and some of them had were leading organizations. And the meeting's primary purpose was, we have someone who looks like us historically who has been elected as president of the United States. But we know, even though, particularly in the primary, he ran with signs saying he was a committed Christian, he knew to talk the language under the tutelage and the discipleship of Jeremiah Wright. But we knew that he didn't hold the positions that were biblical positions. And I knew that from some things that happened when he was senator and some very nasty things that he had said about some Black preachers, which I won't, go into. But the bottom line was, we were saying, hey, what is our responsibility? During that time period, one of the leaders who came from Georgia, who became a very close friend of mine and ultimately the co-founder of the Frederick Douglass Foundation, Dr. Timothy Johnson, spent the night at my house. That morning, it was a 2-day meeting. The next morning, he woke up and he asked me if I knew anything about Frederick Douglass. And I pulled out a big sign and I said, hey, man, I'm leading something that's called the Douglass Leadership Lecture Series. And that was something that I was doing in DC at the time, basically bringing in people like yourself just to tell their story of why they were conservative and kind of what they were doing as leaders in the conservative movement, particularly as African Americans. And that poster, he said, man, I had a dream last night about Frederick Douglass and I want to learn more. So later that day, we had further discussion about what we should do. We didn't come to any full consensus, but we knew that there was a responsibility upon us, at least to engage within our people and to begin to communicate some of these truths. And so uh, a month or two later, I got a letter from Dr. Timothy Johnson, and he said, hey, congratulations, you're the vice chairman of the Frederick Douglass Foundation. So he had filed the paperwork and put my name to it. And so Troy Rowling, Dr. Timothy Johnson, and myself launched the Frederick Douglass Foundation in 2009 and had a small conference here in Washington, D.C. 2010, I remember writing the first press release, and we invited a number of Black Republican candidates to Washington, D.C. The Republican Party didn't even know how many federal candidates that they had running, but we had about 30 of them, and we did a press conference, and guess what? The press showed up, and it became a big story, and now people are like, well, where are all of these Black Republicans coming from? And that was the launch of the Frederick Douglass Foundation. And we've tried to, as a grassroots movement, empower people just like you to make a difference in their community, standing for righteousness and justice.
Yes, and this is you're doing a great job. We hope to help you with that. Tell me some of the upcoming events that current events, near-term events that the Frederick Douglass Foundation on a national level, and I know you work with a lot of state organizations. Are there any upcoming events that our audience should be aware of, and maybe go out and just get some more information on them, so they'll have a little detail on what Frederick Douglass is specifically doing?
Absolutely. One, we would invite people to visit, fdfnational.org. That's fdfnational.org, and sign up for our newsletters so that you can get the updated information. Our biggest event that's coming up is actually through our sister organization, the Douglass Leadership Institute. On Monday, we will have our annual Juneteenth Jubilee, which is an annual gathering that we do. It's kind of an informative fundraising event that we host, where we have notable leaders that are speaking, but we use that time to let people know what our organizations are doing around the country, the successes that we've had, and we honor people with the Frederick Douglass Leadership Award. And so this year we'll be honoring Lieutenant Governor Winsome Sears, who is the Lieutenant Governor here in the Commonwealth of Virginia. She is a proud Frederick Douglass Foundation member, and she'll be speaking at that event. We'll also be honoring a young man who is the vice president of the Frederick Douglass Foundation of Maryland, Giovanni Patterson, who basically has taken on the Baltimore school system by suing them for defrauding children for their education. And so he's in that lawsuit right now. And then there's also a bishop here in this area who has been very innovative in his approach, a very large church, but he's never compromised on the biblical standards, but yet he's highly respected. He's the chairman of their county's commerce, Chamber of Commerce. And so he's been very innovative. So whenever the Chamber of Commerce meets, they meet at his church, a beautiful sanctuary. So anyway, those are the people that we're going to honor at this Juneteenth event. Then the other thing that I would mention is many Frederick Douglass Foundation leaders from around the country will join us for the Road to Majority, which is a national event that's put on by one of our strategic partners, Faith and Freedom Coalition. So we've partnered with Faith and Freedom. They've done an outstanding job by actually covering some of the cost so that it's not as expensive, because coming to Washington, D.C. can be expensive. And so they've helped with that. So I think we'll have over 50 of our leaders from around the country that will participate at Road to Majority, where they'll have Most of the presidential candidates will be speaking, but there'll be workshops. We will also visit Capitol Hill with some pocket cards that we have that'll talk about the sanctity of human life. Frederick Douglass Foundation is noted on those pocket cards. So it's going to be a great time at both of those events here in June. And then lastly, I should mention a virtual event that is going to be at the Heritage Foundation on Tuesday. My good friend and colleague, Benjamin Watson, who is a former NFL Super Bowl champion, Benjamin Watson, who has a brand new book out called The Fight. I think it's called like The New Fight for Life. And Benjamin will be speaking at the Heritage Foundation. So if you visit the Heritage Foundation's website, we're promoting that because Benjamin is a good friend, colleague, and supporter of the Douglass Leadership Institute.
So Dean, I really appreciate your time. I know you're very busy, so we're going to try to get you out of here shortly here. So I'm going to come at it. There's a lot of things we could discuss, but I'm going to come at it from this standpoint about a specific issue. We talked earlier about the anti-Black history of the Democratic Party, the pro-slavery, pro-Jim Crow history of the Democratic Party. And the other part of that is that even though we've been voting them for 40, 50 years, things keep getting worse. Well, I'm going to Bishop Nelson. What do you say to Black voters who are like, the Republicans aren't around, they're not doing anything for us, at least the Democrats are trying. We don't believe in your history, doesn't matter to me. And really what it gets down to is that I need to put food on the table. I need to pay my rent. And unless you guys can come up with something better, I'm going to dance with the devil that I came here with. What would you say to a voter like that or a community like that who's saying, at least they got programs to help my kids and they say all the right things? And a lot of it really gets down to what I remember Elon Musk said. The Democrats seem kinder in some of these communities than the GOP. What would you say to a person like that or a community like that?
Yeah, there are a number of things that I have said and can continue to say, depending upon where I discern that the person is. But based on your question, I basically posit this. I'm like,
Mhm.
do you want to rent for the rest of your life, or do you want to own? Because the biblical model is ownership. And Frederick Douglass did not fight the fight that he fought just to pay rent or lease space on somebody's plantation. His desire is that Black Americans had the right to have full ownership and participation within this free society that we call America. He basically said, look, if we can't stand on our own 2 feet, let us fall. He said, but let us at least try to stand, on our own. And I think that that is the message that I say to people. I say, hey, listen, if you want to stay over there and have, somebody giving you a little bit of a handout, I said, that's good. I said, but that's not me. I think that we deserve better. And when I look at the history of our party and the history of our people, they wanted full ownership in this experiment that we call America. We sometimes, man, our thinking is so small. We have great opportunity in America. Booker T. Washington once said, we can't allow our grievances to overshadow our opportunity. And I think that talking to young people, particularly about the opportunity that exists and taking full advantage of it. I mean, when you talk to Africans who come to this country, they're like, hey, all right, Black people, if you want to do that, sit over there. I'm going to get mine. When you talk to Asians who come to this country, they want to get theirs. We need to develop within ourselves that mindset. I think we need to preach it. We need to demonstrate it in our own personal lives. And we do have to have a heart of compassion to engage with folks, to give them the hope that they can do it. But at the end of the day, it is about a personal decision of what you were going to do yourself. And I believe the more that we do that, we're going to see people say, look, I believe in free markets. I believe in free speech. I believe in the free exercise of religion. And that's what I'm about. So those are some of the things that I try to highlight to people so that they can believe in a better tomorrow.
Okay, so Dean, given that you are my first Juneteenth guest, I'm going to ask that you leave our audience with a Juneteenth message and let you go and have dinner or whatever with your family. But leave our audience a positive Juneteenth message, uh, especially from the perspective of something you hit on. I just find so many of our young people, they just lost all hope. And they just think racism is stopping them from doing anything, and it's just stacked against them. And it's sad that they have this in their heads, but keeping that in mind, what type of Juneteenth message you, as the chairman, president, head man of the Frederick Douglass Foundation nationally, well, we'll leave something with our audience that will be uplifting and hopeful.
Yeah, man. I number one would invite your audience to take a look at an article that I wrote on Juneteenth that can be found at wng.org in their opinion section on Juneteenth, where I basically argue that all Republicans and all Christians should celebrate Juneteenth. That whole idea that when General Granger got the word finally to some Black Americans who did not know that they were free. So I believe that the message that I would encourage people is to know that you are free. As Christians, we know that the word of God says that, you know, he has made us free and free indeed. And I would say to some of those who have celebrated Juneteenth but diminished July 4th, we would never have Juneteenth if we didn't first have July 4th and Independence Day. And we can't forget that there were Black Americans like Crispus Attucks who gave their lives on that day as well. So I'm encouraging all Americans to look at Juneteenth as the beginning of a freedom season all the way through July 4th, where we should have holidays, cookouts, celebrations, picnics, celebrating freedom and celebrating the great American ideal, because we are one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And the only way that it will be that way is if we continue as a people to hold our country to a higher standard. And I believe that that would be the Juneteenth message. You know, early on when they first started Juneteenth in Texas, they also called it Jubilee Day. That biblical idea that slaves are set free, debts are canceled, and it was a great release. And so I would just encourage us to have that great release for all of us to celebrate the idea of freedom that is promised to all Americans.
Well, that's a good note to end on. Bishop Nelson, I will encourage all our audience, not that it's the definitive story, but go out and watch the documentary on the Civil War. I think it's about, 7 or 8 volumes or something like that, and
Nice.
get some perspective. And Frederick Douglass does play a very key role in that documentary, and get some background on that, and just learn our history and where we come from, and the great atonement, I guess, we did for history and the redemption along those lines. So anyway, Dean Nelson, you have been very, very special guest here today on Juneteenth. I look forward to talking to you in the future. I look forward to seeing you in DC soon. And thank you very much, and keep up the great work. Thank you,
bro. Thank you for your leadership out there in Minnesota. We're excited about you guys launching. It's going to be amazing, and know that you've got people that are supporting you around the country, praying for you guys' success. We're really, really excited at the Frederick Douglass Foundation about what you guys are doing.
Okay. Thanks, and have a great evening. You in Washington, hey, go have some Maryland crab cakes or something for me. And I'm looking forward. I've been to Baltimore, and your little wharf up there. What do they call that? The little wharf place you got up there.
The harbor.
At the harbor. That's what I'm looking
yes,
for.
Sir. Yes, sir.
Has some great crab cakes up there. I'm looking forward to having some with you when I can see you in DC. So Amen. Have a great evening. Happy Juneteenth, and keep up the great work, Bishop Nelson.
Thank you so much, man. God bless you.
God bless you.